It's wild.
You're actually playing with the Sora thing?
I mean, I have to somehow excuse the amount of money I'm paying for ChatGPT Pro. So I'm just like every 5 minutes I ask it to make a random video just to keep the servers warm, keep the nuclear plants burning. Uh,
Hello,
no real
everyone.
purpose.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It is Friday, December 27th at 9:07 a.m. here in cold Phoenix, Arizona. I'm joined by my buddies Juanito and Costin, checking in from Washington, D.C. and Bucharest, respectively. Juanito is busy playing with Sora, this new ChatGPT video generator. It's actually pretty good. I noticed there's some nice soft. It looks like it's still recognizable as AI, but it looks like it's getting there a little better. What is your fascination with it so far?
Well, to be honest, I'm just fascinated that this can happen, that it can work, right? Like you asked me like, well, what's the security angle or whatever? No security angle. I don't even want to go the alarmist route about like talking deep fake or any of that bullshit. I'm just genuinely fascinated, right? In the time that I write a prompt, it takes what, like 45 seconds to have two videos generated at 480 or 720p. And yeah, it has all the usual telltale weirdnesses of AI, right? Like where like I had one where it was like a bunch of cats on a desk playing with computers, and then all of a sudden you notice that one of the heads of the cats is on the end of an arm of a person, right? And you're like, okay, weird, uncanny shit. But dude, in 45 seconds generating these videos, I mean, in the first pass, it is genuinely fascinating.
Why do you dismiss deepfake as bullshit?
I just think, it's 5 second limit, no audio. Like, yes, you can. This is a constituent part of what will become very
Right, it's the
problematic
precursor, right?
technology, but we're still at the precursor, right?
And you don't worry about it now, but you imagine deepfake being a key part of, let's say, APT arsenal, threat actors arsenal in the future down the road. This kind of getting fake IT North Korean workers to get jobs, that kind of thing is already happening. How much of it do you think is we going to start to see in like adversary toolkit? Costin, you got
I
a
don't
thought?
know. Oh, Costin, go for it, please.
No, I was thinking, what is the chance that we are exactly that for other more advanced civilizations, that you are playing and acting in videos that they need in order to influence their elections?
Sorry
about that.
The stimulation is alive and well. I don't know. I don't think that in a hyper futuristic sense, we can talk about how much you're going to be able to do with these technologies. But I would essentially break this down the way that we've been breaking it down for the broader set of innovations since ChatGPT came out, which is right now it's a trust and safety problem and a technological limitation. The technological limitation being what we mentioned, right? It's only 5 seconds, you don't have the audio synced, and of course there's like little bugginess to it. And I'm sure that things will iterate, it'll get better, and then it'll become more problematic. But then it's also a trust and safety, there's a trust and safety bottleneck to the abuse in the sense that I'm sending my request to OpenAI. OpenAI is reviewing what it's doing with it. It's going to add some limitations. We're going to find ways to circumvent the limitations. But at the end of the day, you have the trust and safety bottleneck in the middle of it, which even comes down to like, can we just monitor how accounts are being created, how they're being used, etc. The real problematic part comes when you see models like these making their way to your own hardware. Because then there's no trust and safety. There's no limitation. You're also like, fuck deepfakes. The issues that we're going to have largely like revenge porn and a lot of like targeted harassment type, like the really ugly shit out there. And where I still think that at the end of the day, AI has the most abuse potential for anything that used to be so bottlenecked by the throughput of social engineering. So as this stuff keeps getting more accessible and more, you can run it locally and you don't have a trust and safety team in the middle, what I expect to see get supercharged are the truly ugly parts of the threat landscape. BEC, business email compromise, pig butchering, romance scams, abusing the most like vulnerable populations. And I mean, frankly, if you show me the kind of like half deep fakey, half superimposed videos that we were seeing people make for like those interviews, right? Like the North Korean fake IT worker type things. I mean, uh, target that towards vulnerable, like older people that don't have that same level of discernment, that already fall for email romance scams, and it's like that shit's gonna get ugly.
Costin, I've heard you mention using AI ChatGPT to do homework with your daughter, and I'm curious about your own mindset as you introduce AI tooling to kids these days. How old is your daughter? 14, 15? 13?
13.
Wow.
Are you hesitant at all about releasing these tools to her, or in your mind this is just a natural progression of where things go?
I think I'm not really releasing them, but sometimes it's the other way around. She is releasing them on me. Like, for instance, the kind of tools they use to alter the text so it bypasses the AI checks that the teachers do, right? And like knowing all those kind of things, it's sometimes useful for me as I look at on LinkedIn, especially. There's a lot of people who post this kind of here's my thoughts on research for 2024, and you copy paste it into an AI checker, and you see it's actually it's all ChatGPT generated, so it's all fake. I think there are some worries in the sense that like back in my days, it used to be us trying to cheat the teachers with like little written notes and headphones and all this methods, and nowadays it's like a different battle. Like they use AI to generate homeworks, teachers try to catch them. It seems like it's the same kind of a struggle or a battle, if you want, but with different tools, different weapons, and children learn different kind of skills, which may not be necessarily bad or wrong. I mean, someone was asking me like, "What did you learn in university?" And like, it's extremely sad to say that what I learned in university was to copy and to bribe. Like these were the two things that everyone learned in university. You didn't learn new things. Like all the things you were learning were just some kind of old bullshit, completely useless stuff. The things that you learned was to bribe and to copy from your neighbor.
I mean, honestly, I think the problem there is really the style of education, and it's almost universal now, right? Like in the US, we talk about teaching the test, right? Because there's so much standardized testing. Teachers essentially get rewarded for people doing well on standardized tests, so you just end up teaching the test and people don't learn shit. And it's funny you talk about how the technology's changed. Like when I was in like middle school going into high school in the US, I got my hands on a early Casio watch that had a camera. It was a black and white like
James
watch with a
Bond over here
camera.
in high school, yeah.
Bro, I didn't learn. I took years of German. I don't speak two fucking words of German, but I passed all those tests because you were just sitting there taking pictures and then like looking at them on the watch. And then, at the time, this must have been like what, 10 years before the Apple Watch or anything like that. Like the adults just didn't know to think of this kind of thing. So it's always going to be there. If anything, I mean, I can go on a rant about education, like with standardized testing, but my university times were very productive and useful and great because we didn't have any of that testing. Like I went to a great book school. You had tutorials, and you just had to show up and talk to at most 10 people or just to a professor. And that's when you go, okay, does it matter if the technology's there? Does it matter if Google searching made things easier for cheating or watches or iPhones? Were we learning anything in the first place?
We're going to get to the end of this episode and look back at 2024, the top security research. I know Costin put out a Google Doc asking people to make submissions for some of the more memorable and interesting counter threat intelligence, cyber threat intelligence, anti-malware APT research. So we'll get to that in a bit. But over Christmas, it's been relatively quiet on the news front, but there are two items I wanted us to touch on before we get on that. One is this LITTLELAMB.WOOLTEA stealthy network edge device backdoor. There's a report out from a company called Northwave Cybersecurity. Let's start there, Costin. Who is this Northwave people?
Oh, Costin's
Did
internet.
Costin fall asleep?
No, I think Costin's internet kind of crapped out.
What the hell happened? It looks like he just slowly fell asleep.
Romanian internet.
Juanito, who are these Northwave cybersecurity people?
It looks like apparently it's a Dutch company of some sort, or like they seem to have some kind of academic affiliation of some sort. It's great work. I mean, I'd never heard of them before this report, but you know,
They're
good
Dutch.
reversing. I mean, look, the Americans of Europe. No, it's excellent work. What I think is interesting is sort of trying to understand. When you brought this up, and I look at the Palo report as well, you get this sense of maybe this is what we were missing when we talked about this Palo Alto vuln. I can't remember the number
CVE
for it.
2024-9474. CVE
9474.
2024-9474. It's this. We talked about it on the podcast in the
Yeah.
past, and I was a little harsh on them, and you were a little more like circumspect, saying like these guys deserve the benefit of the doubt here. One thing that stood out here is that this only affects firewalls when the management web interface is open to the internet. So I mean,
Right.
if you properly configure this thing, you're not going to be here. But what the Dutch has found is the actual malware, the actual backdoor that was being deployed. What can you tell me about this new report?
Well, what's interesting about that is that they mention that yes, it is a backdoor and it was abusing this vuln, but they mention that this backdoor pops up after the original disclosure that this vuln was there. So I'm not certain that this was the original component that was being abused as much as maybe a follow-on actor. But you know, it looks pretty interesting. I mean, it's the kind of thing that we're getting used to with these vulnerabilities for appliances, where half the time we don't see what the actual implant looks like. And I'm very curious how these Northwave folks got their hands on it.
Mandiant had previously documented this LITTLELAMB.WOOLTEA in a previous paper that connected it to some Ivanti exploitation by the Chinese. Costin, what do you know about this LITTLELAMB.WOOLTEA? Costin is back, by the way.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Sorry. I suffer some sort of internet disconnect issue. But
It's all those VPNs, man.
it's a 15 VPNs. It's possible, yeah. Yeah, so this is like it's an interesting case. Unfortunately, it hasn't been I think documented with a lot of details back in the days when it was originally named, like the original blog from Google Mandiant. So the new research that Northwave Cybersecurity posted, I think it's interesting because it has quite a thorough, deep description of the malware. I don't know if you guys discussed this, but there's like no 100% confidence here that actually what the Northwave guys have actually found is that particular thing. I mean, they say we think it's that, but I mean, it would be nice if the Mandiant guys could actually confirm that it's exactly that one. And otherwise,
This was discovered as 0 day, right? But in this case,
Yeah.
these guys are suggesting it's end day. It's like post availability of patches.
which is what I was thinking. Could it be a different group? Could it be something else? I mean, yeah, it would be good to get confirmation that it's exactly that thingy that Google Mandiant described originally. But yeah, I think that's a lot of details from there allowed people to try to scan the internet for it to see how many backdoor devices there might be. There's a handshake, an interesting handshake with a 48 byte magic packet that you need to send in order to activate the backdoor. And I'm like really curious to see how many victims are on the internet. So there may be very few. And also it might be that this is not the same as the activity previously described by Google Mandiant.
You
What
just
do we know
Silas
public-
is already scanning this
We
shit.
know Silas is scanning, yeah.
Of course he is.
Has
Anything
he
on
finished
virus
already?
total?
Good question. I'll ping Silas.
There's one sample on virus total out of 4, so the other 3 are not on virus total, and I think the installer they mention in the paper is also not on virus total, and actually for the installer they don't provide a hash. They give actually 4 hashes, and one of them is on VT, the other 3 are not.
And we're convinced that this isn't work of nation-state actors, because the language in the Northwave cybersecurity blog is very kind of tentative and
I think this sophistication, I mean, is not typical of cyber criminal gangs. It sounds or it looks a bit more like nation states, and especially if it's exactly this LITTLELAMB.WOOLTEA. We know it would be a Chinese speaking trust. Well, yeah, well, who names it LITTLELAMB.WOOLTEA? Yeah, right.
Oy, it's like a domain name.
And WOOLTEA, is that like what it actually sounds like it is? The tea made of wool? I don't know.
Yeah.
The only thing that bugs me is that it seems to break the naming like schema.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
well, what's up with the dot?
Little
right?
Lamb or WOOLTEA?
Well, what I was thinking is that, you know, for many years, Mandiant was coming up with these two-word names, right? And at some point I was thinking, what do you do? Like, they will eventually run out of two-word names for all these malwares, right? And then what do you do? Like, it's like this
put
old
a dot
style.
in the middle.
Yeah, you probably put a dot, and then you have to rely on forwards. Yeah, I mean, the same issue like Microsoft had with the periodic table, whereas like 116 elements, or depends on which theoretical elements or not. But what do you do when you run out? Then you switch to a meteorological phenomena. Maybe the same.
You'll get a blizzard.
I mean, they didn't run out, right? Like, this is the Mandiant has been following in the footsteps of the, you know, Five Eyes of the IC of using two-word cryptonyms, and they have never run out. So it's not going to be a thing.
I don't know. Maybe they did. I mean, let's be honest. Like, there's tens of thousands of different malware samples out there, and at some point you may simply just run out, or you can even have collisions. Like,
well, we do have collisions.
You can have collisions with things that you can search on Google and find completely unrelated, sometimes even not safe for work stuff. So I don't know.
I think some of those are on purpose, but we'll go with that.
This is, we know we know through Mandiant that this is the work of the Chinese. Is that accurate?
This is, at least this is what Mandiant was saying, right? This is what they said back in the days, and we do see that more recently the Chinese-speaking threat actors, they prefer this targeting of network devices. They like to get persistence on network devices, away from EDRs, away from telemetry, unless of course it's Sophos devices, but away from the things that people can use to detect and eradicate their implants. So
Juanito, who's the typical victim here?
Opportunistic. Anybody who
so?
has the fucking thing like hooked up to the internet front facing without, you know, having configured it properly. I mean, in this case, credit to Palo Alto, right? It's without having configured it properly, because it's a fucking firewall. It is going to be internet facing, right? Like, that's the whole fucking point of this device. So whenever you do too much victim blaming on that part, like, well, why is the device facing the internet? You're like, it is the whole purpose of this device to be internet facing. But yeah, in this case, it seems to be about the configuration of that. And that's where you get into that situation of, we say opportunistic in the sense of, let me pop all of these, the chances of getting caught very low. And then once I'm in, where am I, right? Who are these folks? What are they? What can I get out of it? And that is definitely a major TTP change, particularly with the Chinese, but I mean, with many non-Western APTs, of it's such a land of opportunity to be able to say, I'm just going to hit the whole population of people who own this device, that have set it, you know, internet facing, that happens to be vulnerable to this vuln. And it's like the nth extension of, if you remember, like things like CCleaner and other early supply chain attacks, Shadow Hammer, where we were kind of impressed by the change in TTP for these Chinese threat actors to be like, oh no, before we used to say an APT is targeted, they're only going to hit very specific people, and they don't want to get so loud. And we started to see them phishing with dynamite in those cases where you go supply chain attack, you hit 10,000 people, you figure out who you like, then you deploy the next stage. This is a sort of like an alternate track of that where you go, I'm going to hit everyone with this type of appliance because it's vulnerable. I'm going to live there quietly. I'm going to figure out what's valuable, who's worth what. And you know it's not nose, right? Like you know that if you were able to hit this Swiss cheese appliance, like chances are somebody else is going to show up here too. So grab what you want, do what you need, move out, move on.
That was going to be my next question. We expect others are also looking in this in looking around to see where this is exposed, right? It's not only going to be one threat actor looking at this. So that
It's
becomes
probably not
important.
even one Chinese threat actor. It may
Right.
very well be, 12 Chinese threat actors, 2 Russian ones, and then, whatever else follows along.
All right, the other story that's bubbling up, and I think this one broke late last night. I was seeing it on Twitter right before I went to bed at 8 a.m. like an old man, was a company called Cyberhaven had an employee compromised and hacked to distribute malicious Chrome extension. Apparently, this is an insider threat startup that uses a browser extension as a tool for monitoring and blocking data filtration and so on, tracking data sent via email. So this and it seems like they've been compromised and someone's been pushing malicious Chrome extensions. Costin, is this something you've been following? I know it just happened late last night.
I looked a bit into this. I grabbed the 2 of the scripts that have been injected. So yet another supply chain attack, if you want. I think the most interesting side of this story is that probably, at least this is my suspicion here, is that Cyberhaven were not like singled out as a target, but they somehow belong to a cluster of multiple Chrome extensions that have been targeted and maliciously injected with this backdoor code. So there's a bunch of others. Some of them are VPN extensions. To be honest, VPN extensions that I haven't heard about before. The same could probably say about Cyberhaven. I personally haven't heard of this company before, so it's kind of new to me. All these extensions, again, they're probably not like super well known and super popular, but I guess that they do have a following. And
But this is a business. I mean, this is a tool they sell as part of their business product. So you
at
imagine all
least
the
in the
customers.
at least in the case of Cyberhaven,
In the case of
right,
Cyberhaven,
right,
right.
correct. Yeah, but I think whoever is doing this, they're probably targeting multiple different extensions at the same time, and they do go after people's private data. Again, these extensions, VPN extensions, is not something that I recommend personally. I don't use VPN extensions. I think a much better choice is to get a Mulvad subscription with cryptocurrencies. Then you establish a WireGuard tunnel without redirecting your traffic and just use a WireGuard SOCKS server through the tunnel inside your browser. So that's, in my opinion, way more secure than putting one of these extensions in your browsers.
Medium blog for setup when
I will do one. I can
there
do.
you go.
Remember, I did a talk some years ago on how to monitor your home internet for fun and profit. So for sure, this is the next.
You need a VPN guide, a proper VPN guide.
Yeah, which VPNs, and again, keep in mind that there's people out there who don't want you to use VPNs. Like obviously here, people targeting all these VPN extensions, they don't like the fact that people use VPN extensions. They don't like the fact that people use VPN. So to me, that's good.
I'm sure they like it by the time that they can use them to pop people, right? Like I think
of course.
The other side of this is just how lawless the extension side of things is, right? And we had this conversation. We may have had this conversation. I about the Operation Digital Eye, right? Like we were talking about VS Code and the VS Code marketplace, and how really that it's one of these many areas now where people can post things and it's executable code that's somehow going to get pulled down, not inspected and used. And Chrome browser extensions are a fucking free-for-all that I don't think anybody's been paying proper attention to. I don't even know how well any of like the endpoint products really monitor for it, because Chrome itself is a very difficult beast. And what you're getting with these browser extensions is just a bunch of JavaScript code. It's not even properly sandboxed. You can even have, if you want it to be really clever, you could even orchestrate activity across multiple Chrome browser extensions. Then even if you analyze one, you're not going to notice what's happening with the others because they can communicate with each other, even though that design shouldn't work. So that's one of the many areas where you just look at it and you go, this is a fucking nightmare. Like whatever supply chain attacks happening with browser extensions, Godspeed. And that's why I'm looking at that list of domains, right? The Christopher Stanley who put up the information about Cyberhaven. He also put the list of other domains that are shared with the cert history. And yeah, I mean, it's like a dozen not very well known browser extensions. And I flagged it to the guys at Labs, and I'm wondering if anybody's got the time because it's the holidays. But I would be very curious to go look at the cert history, grab each of these domains, identify when the domains were registered, and then from using that as a starting point in my timeline, go grab every version of the browser plugin that has come out since that that domain got registered and go from there. And I'll be very curious to see, fine, Cyberhaven, good on them. They fucking noticed. And the question is, how many of these have not?
They described it as an advanced attack that successfully targeted an employee. It was more or less a phishing email, right?
But no. Look, give them credit, right? Like whatever it was, whatever.
Why are we giving these people credit? Just because they said
we've
been hacked?
No. Hey, look, there are at least 12 victim organizations here. One of them, which is
You're
a security
guessing, though.
vendor,
We're guessing that there's 12 victim organizations here.
Well, let's say there's 12 target organizations. We don't know if they're victims, but we know they're targets, right? We don't know if they got popped or not. We know at least one of them did.
If they were targeted,
most likely they did. But look, I will say there is some advancedness to it. It's targeted. They went after a dev. When they got on the dev, the whole point of it was to turn it into a supply chain attack, and they successfully deployed. So they understood how things work at this organization. They developed something specifically for this plugin, right? Like that's not bullshit. That's not a small thing. They didn't get in there and then just like, fuck around and throw a crypto miner into their extension or something like, right? Like there is something to be said. This is clearly a coordinated, targeted campaign aimed at turning Chrome browser extensions into supply chain vectors. And that is something worth paying attention to. And like I said, credit to the Cyberhaven people because they noticed, they figured out what was happening. They didn't just notice that somebody had gotten phished or whatever. They noticed what the import of the operation was. They fixed their shit and they let other people know. Could they have done more? Sure. I mean, this is clearly ripe for further investigation as to what's happening with these other browser extensions. But I'll take them sounding the alarm as a big qualified win.
Costin, you share that thought? I mean, you're happy with the way Cyberhaven communicated this? Because there's downstream implications. So I guess this is where communication becomes crucial and important.
I mean, I can also shift the discussion a bit here to Google Chrome, and just wanted to say that typically there's no visible sign that one of these extensions has been updated, or that you have a new version of whatever thing running in your browser. And you don't know like what's the difference, like what's new in this extension. And then there's like a myriad of different versions of these extensions for different browsers, not just Chrome. So we have to keep in mind that it's not just Chrome users that are the.
You think the browser should do a better job of flagging outdated things and like push people more proactively to update?
Absolutely, not just outdated things, but somehow to raise awareness about the fact that there's been updates in browser extensions. And I mean, if a new browser extension has some functionality through which it connects to a new domain, I think I would like to know that. If that domain did not exist in that extension, I think I would like to know. And I think also Google maybe could do a better job at screening this modification. So whenever they spot a new extension that you embed some kind of new domain in there that hasn't been before, like running in a sandbox, maybe put it on hold and use some kind of multi-factor checks with the developer to confirm that this new functionality is legitimate.
I don't
Yeah,
want to
I
pick on cyber.
agree.
Sorry,
No,
Juan,
no.
go.
I was just gonna say I agree with Kosin in that right now that my issue with the browser extensions is the level of um, transparency with which things happen, right? Like it's completely uh, not obvious that it's been updated, but even if they hadn't been updated, at no point are you asked for, additional permissions for the browser extension. At no point are you told, hey, this browser extension is monitoring your screen this whole time. Like, are you cool with that? Or like, all of a sudden the thing is checking for the microphone, or all of a sudden, like as Kosin said, it's connecting to some other domains. Like there is, you cannot see, you are not told what it is that these browser extensions do, and the fact that they can get updated so easily. I mean, it's just, and there's other ways you could go about fucking with these, right? Like they are JavaScript files in your on your local machine. Having an existing infection, I mean, that would be an amazing persistence mechanism. It's an amazing side channel for comms that you don't have to load even through their store. So that's where you get into the two different versions of essentially protection and regency when it comes to these things. You need Google to be doing a better job of monitoring what's happening with their essentially app store for Chrome browser extensions. And then B, you need the browser itself, which can load extensions that are not coming from that particular store and so on. You need it to do the Apple thing of saying, hey, this thing is asking for greater permissions. Hey, this thing has suddenly started doing something that it wasn't doing before. And until you do that, we are flying completely blind.
With the explosion of info stealers and the fact that we know employees are going to be phished, devs are going to be a target and devs are going to be phished. The fact that we pin a lot of onus on Google to do much better at what you guys just described. In-house at a company, and there are some technical barriers and some policy things that should be in place that make sure someone gets compromised doesn't push these malicious things. Like, what is the technical control internally at Cyberhaven that should have, checkmarked this?
There was, I think there was a funny post on X a few days ago specifically about this, that the CEO is asking, what are we doing about Russian APTs leveraging ChatGPT and Sora to target us, when in reality everyone here is copy-pasting code and sharing it unencrypted, and the CFO has a 2-star Google Chrome extension that changes his Gmail to Comic Sans.
this Solstice account, like they've been putting cool shit.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool shit, but so realistic. I mean, I've seen. I wanted to say I've seen this before for real. A friend of mine discovered that his laptop was trying to ping a shady domain. And we looked together, and finally we nailed it down to a Chrome extension. And what was interesting about that Chrome extension, it had a name very similar to these popular ad blockers. Like there's this very famous AdBlock Plus, MuBlock Origin, and so on and so on. And this extension had a very, very similar name to one of these super popular ones. There were thousands of other people out there with the same extension. And somehow this extension seems to have been somehow abandoned. And the only thing we were still doing was doing kind of a ping to a random looking domain. Not like any kind of supply chain attack, exploitation, or extraction of data, but what it was doing, just fetch that remote domain. So the people behind that domain knew the browser version, these kind of things, right? So nevertheless, I think there's very, very, how to say, sneaky attacks that can be executed here through similarly looking extensions. Those have names very similar to the super popular ones. And all that can be abused. And there's very, very little you can do from your point of view as a user. Like, you have no control, basically.
We saw that, right? Like, there was a time, particularly, and I mean, it speaks to your point, right? I don't remember what the name was of the specific ad blocking extension, but it was very popular. You had AdBlock and AdBlock Plus, and then you had uOrigin, uBlock, and like all this stuff.
Correct.
And one of them got sold to some advertiser,
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden you go from like, oh, you have this massive deployment of this Chrome extension to, well, now that is controlled by the calls from inside of the house. And there is very little checking for this sort of thing. So to the point of this Solstice account on Twitter, this is one thing that never gets accounted for in the general how would you call it, right? Threat modeling of what's happening in your organization. And there is this obsession with the privacy of information that's going to extensions that are actually legitimate, right? You go, oh, people are using Grammarly. How much do you want your information going to Grammarly? And we can have a whole discussion about that in particular. But to me, to the point of this Solstice account on Twitter, I mean, fuck the privacy concerns with a multi-billion-dollar company that's mining your data. That, yes, that is a problem, but it's definitely lower in the list of priorities than the people gathering your data for shady organizations you've never fucking heard of, period, because somebody goes and installs Grammarly with an E instead of an A. And that's a completely different typo squatted extension, right?
Is it realistic to ask our 75 listeners to remove all browser extensions and don't use extensions? That's not realistic either, right? Because with AI and ChatGPT and all these wrappers, they're now coming as extensions, and that seems to be where we're starting to overboard in our browsers with these extensions. What is the final bit of advice to folks on using extensions, managing them, secure them?
So I think in Firefox, they have some kind of safety star rating scheme for extensions. So
people still using Firefox?
That hurt. That hurt.
Oh,
I remember I don't use Google Chrome. I said this many times.
Yes.
I do not use Google Chrome.
But I feel like that's a little bit of a misdirection, but go ahead.
No, I didn't say you
Sneaky
shouldn't
mother.
use Google Chrome. I said I do not use it personally. I use Chrome.
What about extensions?
Extensions. So I tell you what I like and what I wouldn't say what I use, but the ones that I like, because it's never a good idea to tell what I use, because like next thing, certain people hack the developers of those extensions just to target me specifically. Yeah, and people say I'm paranoid. I'm not paranoid. I'm just very realistic. So the ones that I like and recommend, Privacy Badger is one of them from EFF that I like. uBlock Origin is another one. Decentralayas is another one that helps with your privacy. Cookie Auto Delete is another extension that I personally like. I'm trying just to minimize my footprint and the ability of the big data brokers to spot my network activity across the wires. So this is why I like all these different things. But in terms of privacy, yeah, Privacy Badger, uBlock Origin. And don't forget, like a very simple and powerful tool is Pi-hole. Like running your own DNS, little DNS server on a Raspberry Pi, running Pi-hole can do wonders to your online privacy.
How are you making sure you're keeping them up to date, keeping them secure? You're just manually trying to remember? Like, what is your own policy on keeping?
In theory, they get updated by themselves, right? So in theory, they get auto updates. What I do, but I know again this is extreme, and I'm an extreme case, but I do monitor all the traffic from my browser, from my home. Everything gets saved in logs, which are stored in multiple places.
This guy is better than Microsoft.
Oh, for sure.
He has logs.
For sure.
And not just saving all these logs, but regularly looking at the logs, weeding out, let's say, the typical traffic and looking for anomalies on a daily basis. And sometimes you find interesting things like extensions beaming out the domains that they shouldn't. But I think, like, overall, just to draw a line, kind of a conclusion here in this story, you know that Google implemented a bunch of new security features in Chrome that make it more difficult for malware developers and stealer developers to extract your private data out of Chrome. So All these security features make it a bit more difficult to develop effective info stealers. So I think what we are seeing and what we are going to see in the future is more of these malware developers creating Chrome extensions that they can just push into Chrome in order to harvest your data from within the browser if it becomes too difficult to do it from the outside. So I think we'll see more of these because, as security evolves, so do the attacks evolve.
Juanito, just to close the loop on this story, do you expect more companies to come forward like Cyberhaven did and say, hey, make sure you update our browsers, make sure you update your thing, or this is one of those that's going to kind of just fade away by the time we get back to work on the new year?
I mean, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive scenarios, but I expect we will hear confirmation that more of these browser extensions are have been compromised, and I expect that we will also find out just how many of these companies are or browser extensions are being run by half defunct companies, somebody's hobby project, something that nobody's maintaining anymore. This kind of shit happens all the time. Actually, that may be the safest browser extension is the one that the developer isn't even bothering to actively develop anymore, but is not checking their emails. So, yes, we're going to find out about more of this. Is this going to be sort of the thing that finally makes people? No.
All right, guys, let's get
maybe
to
one thing that I was thinking about, and I was wondering what you guys think as well. What if the Cyberhaven guys actually originally got owned because they were using one of those other shady extensions? So, like, what if it wasn't necessarily phishing, but it was like extraction of in-browser data through a malicious VPN extension?
Maybe, but you see the domain being created, right?
Correct.
So like there's some level of targeting here. I'm also really curious what the general CI/CD pipeline looks like for these things. Like if we want to talk about the safety of Cyberhaven itself,
that's a question I tried to ask earlier. It was like, what kind of technical controls do they have internally to block a compromised account from pushing out a malicious extension? I mean, I expect your pipeline should have some sort of guardrail there.
Well, we don't know what the pipeline looks like, or even if there is a pipeline, right? Like, did they get on this developer's box and find out that this developer happens to just be the person who writes the code, compiles, pushes it, has all the certs on this one laptop, right? Which is very plausible. Or is there a full-on CI/CD pipeline and some GitHub action and whatnot? But at the end of the day, neither of those scenarios necessarily entail any active observability, right? What you have with the proper CI/CD pipeline is you can have inline controls, you're going to have a versioning history, you're going to have something that other people can check. It's not just a single machine that has no proper introspection, but it isn't in and of itself an end-all be-all solution. It's just a centralization of the development process that is a good practice. It is what you want. And whenever we start talking about how we're going to check this stuff and more programmatically make sure things aren't going wrong, you're going to want that CI/CD pipeline to be there. But it also does not mean that things are well, right?
All right. I don't want to bring Conspiracy Ryan into this too much, and I want to close the loop on this story. But do you guys ever worry that these browser extensions might be some malicious person playing the long game, getting it deployed Wild West? Has there been documented cases of this being, you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, to the point of what we discussed before, right? You have a legitimate, popular, well-rated extension that's being used by everybody, right? Like I think it was uBlock Origin. It was one of these where a lot of people were using it. It had good star rating. It
Great
was
acquisition target,
legitimately, right? And then it was just acquired, right? And that's where you go. At the end of the day, you're still trusting whomever is the regent over this thing not to get swayed by somebody who waves a bunch of cash in front of their face, right? And look, most of these extensions are unpaid. Yeah. Most of these extensions are free, and the problem with that freemium, economy is that it's really hard to look at a developer who's been working hard to maintain something everybody uses
On your $5
and
donation, right?
yeah, with maybe a $5 donation, and somebody comes and says, "Hey, buddy, here's 5 mil, walk away," and you really blame them for doing that.
Which is a perfect segue to our top 5 research picks for the year. And I know, Costin, we actually, just to the listeners, we actually picked our top 5. I don't want to call it research, but a combination of research work, technical paper, news item, something that was impactful to the general public. I think that's how I position my picks. But Costin, you and I both picked the XE Utils backdoor story as a significant top 5 story this year. Why did you put XE at the top of your list?
Well, if I were to pick just one single story out of 2024, I think it was this XZ backdoor. I mean, the way it was executed, how Gia10, if you remember, how he ran this psyops, years-long psyops to try to infiltrate to become a maintainer for the library, knowing that like in the long run, he can get access to SSH, open SSH through this side library. I think that is probably the most significant story of 2024. Again, discovered originally by Anders Freund. I was telling my wife, she asked, like, what is that? She wanted to see the top 5 stories. I said, like, here's the most interesting one. And she was saying, how did Andreas Freund discover it? I said, like, well, he was trying to log in a remote box and he noticed the login was 300 milliseconds slower than usual. And she was like, how do you notice that? And it's like, yeah, there's people out there who notice these things. And not
They're
only
called
that,
autists.
he that's true. And he not only that, but he looked at the code and he spotted the code was doing something it wasn't supposed to. And I remember I feel a bit ashamed that I was looking at the code myself, knowing there's a backdoor in there. And I just couldn't, like, if you wanted me to put the finger on the like malicious code in there, it wasn't like that. It was not like any of the bad backdoors that we have seen before. And I guess it wasn't just Andres Freund, but there were a number of other people who published amazing research. And I think we should do a shout out to them, to Thomas Rosia, Daniela Aminov, Anthony Williams, Bojan Zdrunja. Sorry if I butchered your name. Sorry. Serge Bazansky and Ginwell Coldwind, I guess it's a nickname. All these, they published very, very significant pieces in the XZ backdoor research together with many other people, which, in my opinion, makes it for the most interesting story. And you know why it's the best? Because the best spy agencies out there, they haven't attributed it. Like, we haven't seen NSA come forward and say who it was, like they did with many other cases in the past. That tells you how good Gia10 was.
Do you think it was the work
story.
of a spy agency?
It has to be, yeah. It has to be the work of a very resilient, a very persistent spy agency, one that plays like the long game and is always innovating, if you want.
I put it on my list just because, for this very reason, the fact that it's still unattributed and there's no attempt either. I feel like it's one of those stories that have fallen off the radar, and it's fascinating to me because, like, prior to this story, nobody knew that this this XZ was even a dependency of OpenSSH, right? Like, somebody had to notice that and then play this super long game.
Correct.
And then everything came into play when the developer, the maintainer, Lassie Colin, was dealing with health issues. He wasn't fully engaged. They had the sock puppets that kind of nudge him along and saying, give access to this thing. So it was like, it was a fascinating story.
Fantastic.
But Juan, why haven't we been able to attribute this at all? It's just one of those that's just cleverly done.
We discussed this briefly in one of the earliest episodes of the podcast, but I think the people who are in a position to best attribute this or have no are some of the usual steel trap organizations, right? Like GitHub is probably the best poised to do proper pattern of life analysis, back-end connections. Did these people over a year and a half, you're telling me there were never any mistakes in, what VPNs they were using, what IPs they connected from, how this, how
so GitHub knows.
Well, I don't know. I do not know that for a fact. But I think if anyone could know, GitHub has the greatest likelihood of knowing, or having greater indications that the rest of us could use to try to attribute this thing. I don't know that they know, but I think they have the most legitimate material with which to make that assessment.
That sounds okay. Who owns GitHub?
Microsoft.
So Microsoft knows. It's
Oh,
impossible, in my opinion. Well, it's not impossible. It's hard to believe that,
unlikely.
unlikely that with all the capabilities that Microsoft have, they can't attribute it. But if they can't, then it's like an even
Even
stronger
greater.
testament to how good these guys were.
Or they're aware they've done it and they've been asked not to.
I mean, like you see that with previous stories like SolarWinds, WannaCry, pretty much anything, you see that these big agencies, FBI, CISA, their friends, basically, eventually they come forward and say, like, this is an indictment to these guys who were responsible for that particular attack. So sometimes it takes longer, but I think that in this case, there's no desire, either no desire, no interest. It's like one of those kind of stories that it's better we just forget about it. Like, let's have a beer and forget about it.
Juanito, what was your top story for this year?
I actually had a really hard time picking the top five for two reasons. Honestly, this year has been super bogged down for me, and I realized just how little I've kept up with the sheer amount of awesome research that people have put up. Like, I just went through the backlog of like, what has ESET published this year? What has Mandiant published this year? And I'm like, holy shit, I've read maybe like a third of the stuff that's come out. So it actually felt really, it was actually pretty difficult for me to choose. And in some cases, the stories that I thought were most impactful, the best that I could point to were Wired articles. So it actually made me realize that I will be paying for a Wired subscription. I don't really, I've been paying for WAPO and a couple other places, but Wired, especially with Andy Greenberg, like they just do such a great job of actually pointing to things and being like, hey, this is actually a worthwhile story. So for me, the top thing definitely was the Predatory Sparrow story. This is just since you said not research but stories, impactful things. Predatory Sparrow for me is
Remind the
still
people what that was.
so that's still, dude. I've discussed it like 4 times in the podcast, but
We
and I'm
got
sure
76 listeners coming aboard.
people are tired of hearing me say the same things. But no, I think Predatory Sparrow, or what we call Meteor Express, which is these sort of like sabotage operations, remote sabotage operations against Iran over the past like 3 years or so.
These are the
To
ethical
me,
Israeli hackers, according to the
well,
Max Smith Institute, right?
according to that, I think that's some of the most interesting stuff that's happening in cyberspace, period, right now. There's not enough research on it. I published some stuff. I know Hamid Kashfi published some stuff. And then I point to the Wired story primarily because I think it's the most comprehensive attempt at an account. And you mentioned sort of Max Smith's, what was it? It's not was it in Binding Hook or Virtual Routes? Binding Hook did an article about it that we discussed, I think, one or
Last
two
week.
episodes ago,
Yeah.
last week. And James Shire and some of these folks discussed that, and also in a more comprehensive fashion. But note that this is one of those situations where like we're all kind of stepping out of the way and not necessarily going hardcore on the research. But it is, I think, a landmark situation that I would hope to see books written about or entire research papers written about in the aftermath. And I would hate, I don't know that we want to see anything all that hardcore into it right now, but I would hate to come back 3 or 5 years from now, and hopefully we're done with this bullshit, and to see that nobody ever picked up the trail. I would be pretty sad about that.
Costin, a thought on this vigilante? Will we call it vigilante? How would you
call them
describe this type of?
Nation state APT, right?
Yeah.
I would say it's nation state APT, but maybe what's interesting here is, as far as I know, it's targeting only one country, right? Iran. There have not been any kind of documented
They
operations
hit
outside.
Syria early on.
They hit Syria early on. All right, it started. It started.
Yeah.
You think?
It started with Syria, and that, sorry, just to kind of set the baseline
Mhm.
there, there is another group that has been operating in Lebanon that to me I've always
Mm.
just assumed is another offshoot of the same Predatory Sparrow, Meteor Express guys, but the Sateb al-Kalam or something like that. Anyways, I cut
Um,
you off, Costin.
what? No. What I like here, I think, with there's a lot of stories like this, kind of these activist looking groups, right? We're talking about Lab.WOOLTEA, Green Leakers over the time. What I think is the main difference is that, like all those previous cases, they come and go. It's like an operation that runs for a month or 2 months, maybe 3 months, and then they completely disappear. Everything is abandoned, deleted, and they move on to the next. Like what makes it special, I think, in case of Predatory Sparrow is that they come back over and over. So it's unlike the other operations. This is kind of a longer running operation targeting Iran, like you said. I think is a main target for them. Syria, Lebanon, possibly, and yeah, like this kind of long-term mentality together with all the safeties, trying to be in a way conscious about what they're doing and whom they're targeting. And again, they are not targeting for the fun or just to destroy things, but it's pretty obvious that the goal is the overturn of the regime in Iran. Like this is the end goal. They want the regime to fall and to replace it with a democratic alternative.
But do you expect this to be kind of the norm going forward about how these nation states will kind of go back and forth at each other?
I think that whoever is running this is probably a couple of years ahead in agility and in, let's say, mentality on how they run these things. I think they've probably experimented with things in the past. They've done things in different ways, and they came up with the conclusion that something like this is the best choice, like long term. You need to be very careful, for instance, when you're targeting a country, not to alienate the people. So, like, typical example here is when you drop sanctions on like the entire country, and the result is that the population becomes very upset, like they don't love you anymore, like they hate you. So the outcome is the opposite. So you need to be very careful with the operations that you run and how you run them, so you don't antagonize the population. What you want, again, is a regime change. You don't want to antagonize the population. I think this is the best way forward in terms of how future APT operations and influence operations and regime change operations should look like.
All right, let's shift to the next story. The next story on my list was this GRU 29155 military intelligence unit for the first time caught doing cyber operations. I mean, we got fascinating reports this year, including documentation from CISA and the FBI talking about this 29155 that is traditionally blamed for like assassinations and poisonings and these real hardcore physical type attacks, now doing cyber operations. Juan, you also had this on your list as something that you wanted to flag again, another Wired story. Why did this one stand out to you?
Well, I definitely want to point to the Wired story in particular because they talk about the mystery researcher who has been following this group and had the attribution on the group even before the indictment came out. So I want to, shout out to the mystery researcher. I mean, we know the kind of amazing work that went into it, and it was amazing to see somebody map out the identities and the identities of these threat actors and everything that they'd been up to so early on, even before the indictment came out. I think it's also a testament to the value of doing proper attribution full on. That's something that doesn't get discussed. It's something that gets questioned, right? Like we have conversations where people are just basically saying, "Hey, what's the value of attributing? Why do I want to know who this person is? Why do I even care about blah blah blah?" And and sometimes we have a difficult discussion about that, like why it matters. I think this is a perfect example of why it matters. When you look at this situation with 29155, understanding the identities of the individuals involved in these operations is what brings into focus the fact that this is an example of a sabotage focused military unit that's also doing cyber. And that nuance is what makes this important, because when we looked at, let's say, Whispergate, and the stuff that preceded some cyber attacks that preceded the invasion of Ukraine, um, we looked at it. We said, look, there's clearly some new or different threat actor here. But we don't know why these operations would be all that significant, other than the fact that they are doing this targeting around the time of war. And then when you actually understand the individuals involved, it puts everything into a completely different perspective. You go, okay, this is a change in how warfare is being organized and how these operations are being organized, and in the scope of a very particularly troubling type of activity. And it only comes into view when you understand who the people are. So like there is something to be said for doing that research properly, not pussyfooting around the complications of naming what individual and what people are involved. And maybe you don't want to publish that. I understand, but you definitely need to do it. Like if the thread is there to be pulled, you need to pull that thread and make a decision about what that information tells you.
Costin, I remember the day this story came out, you and I were texting and you mentioned, wait a second, there's no way this is these 29155 people they're linking. In your mind, it was like, what the hell is going on? Why was that your initial reaction, Juan? And does it make you nervous in any way that there's any sort of nervousness around these types of folks doing this type of thing?
I mean, the reason, let's say, that I thought it's a mistake originally is because this unit 29155 is pretty famous for their poisoning, or attempted poisonings would be a more accurate statement. They were the ones who actually tried to poison Bulgarian arms dealer in Bulgaria, as well as the Sergei Skripal case, like the super famous case that happened in Salisbury in March 2018. So I was thinking, like, how is it that these guys who are essentially on the ground specialists, people who go physically travel somewhere to apply these poisons on the door handles, on the car handles, and so on, how is it that they do cyber? And I guess it's just the fact that nowadays everyone's doing cyber. Cyber is a new fashionable poison, if you want. People realize that destructive malware and Trojans and all the spy tools have the same, sometimes, if not even, let's say, bigger impact in the bigger course of the war, and which is why we see this happening again. I'm still a bit suspicious, in the sense it's for sure not exactly the same people who are doing both things, but yeah, being the same people in the same unit is more accurate to how to depict it here.
One of the themes popping up from the things we picked is how much malware and cyber activity is now linked to physical conflict and wartime things. I have Volt Typhoon on my list, which was originally released as the U.S. government basically saying, hey, we found this thing in Guam and some areas where we believe the Chinese are actually pre-positioning for a future war or future conflict. And the U.S. government spent much of 2024 talking, before the other typhoons pop up, we were talking about Volt Typhoon being in every piece of critical infrastructure. Shout out to Microsoft and shout out to the guys at Mandiant for really doing some amazing work documenting this Volt Typhoon thing. Why wasn't this on any of your lists?
Wait, what when you say documenting this, what do you mean? Wait. Like, if you ask me, this is like the biggest fail story of the year. Like, it's definitely not on my list because there's nothing good about it. There's only bad things. There's no IOX still. The only discussions we've had in the past about Volt Typhoon was about how lawyers are stopping people from sharing things and IOX and responsibility and corporate and so on. And still we are in the position where the US government is saying like the reality is that we can't kick those guys out of our networks, but please don't use VPNs. However, do use some kind of encrypted messengers, but not VPNs, because yeah, these guys will probably intercept your traffic, but if you use VPNs, we can't intercept your traffic to warn you that you are infected. So to me, this is like the biggest fail of the year. And the way
When
it
you
was
say fail,
handled,
what do you mean by fail?
the way it was handled, like the targets, the victims. Again, we're talking about presidential candidates, future president and vice president of the United States have been targeted. And it's like a total black hole of IOX. Again, maybe the best research here was released by Trend Micro, Japanese company, and we don't even know if it's the same Volt Typhoon, but it's a kind of different Volt Typhoon. To me, it's like the biggest failure story of the year in terms of not being a research that we would like to see.
But
I mean,
CISA and the FBI is making it clear that these people have already hacked into our communications, energy, transportation systems, water, waste management systems. It's like all the things that should make like the hair on your neck stand up. Juan, do you worry about this Volt Typhoon people?
No, it's not that I worry about them.
Is it real?
Yeah. No, it's real and it has to exist. Like this is something we discussed in the podcast before where I'm like, look, we've never seen China do cyber physical or cyber sabotage as far as I can tell. And I'm very curious as to what that means because the idea that the Chinese military does not have this capability sounds ludicrous on its face. It's ridiculous to think that they can't do it. So, it is kind of fascinating to consider. And I wonder if that's what's part of this kind of red scare of like, oh my God, like they're preparing, right? And you go, is it because we haven't seen them do it before that we're wondering where in their military posture and doctrine this fits and under what circumstances they would actually deploy and use it. But I'm with Costin in that I don't think it's the biggest fail, but I think it's one of the biggest fails of the stories of the year in the sense of like the lack of more concrete understanding of what's going on and sort of this weird sense of prioritization of intelligence collection and signals collection and whatnot, where you go, this is so important that we can't tell people the specifics because, we want to have this understanding. We don't want to spook the actor. But it's not so important that we shouldn't tell people that it's happening, right? And that's the same thing with Salt Typhoon. I think that's one of the big fails. One of my other stories is probably the other very, very big fail in my view, which is the notion of the APT-29 in Microsoft, where I was looking around because I'm like, this is a massive story. This is a really important story of 2024. And you go, the only information I can find is the Microsoft report about it. And while I want to shout out Microsoft's researchers for figuring this out and working on it, I think it's a testament to the shit situation that we're in that only Microsoft would be in a position to write about it, and only they wrote about it, and we will never know the real scope of what happened there.
Costin, you want to jump on the next big item on your list? I'll get back to your APT-29.
I wanted to apologize that I put like all the typhoons in the same bucket, but what I was thinking, of course, Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, I was thinking you can't possibly worry that Volt Typhoon is going to start a war against the United States while Salt Typhoon is just standing by. So in reality, it's not just one threat actor that you have to worry about. And these stories are not really about one single threat actor. You need to look at the bigger scope and bigger picture, understand that Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, they can't be working independently. If they're like pre-positioning and so on, this is like not just one single threat actor. It's a multitude. And the Volt Typhoon, a fail for sure. Salt Typhoon, a bigger fail. But keep in mind they come in a bucket together with the other typhoons, Chinese-speaking threat actors. And I think that the way they were handled this year is a fail.
Interesting.
It's funny when we say fail, on some level, I want to almost clarify who we are referring to as failing, right? Because it's not, I don't think the journalists are failing. If anything, they seem to be the only canary in the coal mine that's kind of really letting us know what's going on. And I don't get the sense that the researchers involved in some of these things are failing. I think I'm tempted to hang the failure on the Christmas tree of like corporate entities that are involved or government entities that are involved, but I'm not sure where to put it. Like, I know someone's fucking up. I know multiple people are fucking up. I'm not entirely certain in what way they're fucking up, and I'm not entirely certain who exactly is fucking up. But I know someone's fucking up.
Is there a suspicion that a lot of this, what you call fucking up and not properly documenting things, are driven by politics and business decisions? Or do you think it's driven by lawyers and intelligence agencies doing their own kind of research? Or, like, Juan, you mentioned this in your LabsCon keynote, which I should have put on my list here for honorable mentions, because I think it was one of those significant ones where you talked about companies not even properly documenting things because they do business in China, or they do business here, they do business there. We start to see that seeping into what we know. Is that a something at stake here?
What do you mean? Like, can you rephrase that?
I want to move on.
No, hit me. I mean, I'm just like, I don't know.
No,
how many lawyers does it take to bury a story?
This is almost certainly like the lawyers at these different companies, like that, they for sure. But I don't know that I blame the lawyers alone, right? The favorite topic, every single Salt Typhoon section, we've said the same fucking thing, but like, it's the lawyers, and it's also the government, in that, look, the lawyers are doing, in most situations, the lawyers are being overactive, and they're overreaching, and they're telling you to be quiet for no good reason.
When you say the lawyers, you're talking about the lawyers at companies that should be documenting these things, or the lawyers, victim lawyers?
I mean, it's both, right? In some of these situations, the victims are the only, it's like what I was mentioning with Microsoft and ABT 29. The victim is the only researcher, is the only documenter who could possibly say it. So whatever the lawyers cut out, whatever the executives cut out, because it's not a good look for Microsoft, means that the official record has these giant Swiss cheese-sized holes in it that are just affecting our collective understanding. But when it comes to the Salt Typhoon ones, I don't want to blame just the lawyers of these companies, because there is some semblance of liability. There is a concern about, because it's become so like, insane, what's happening? There's going to be some fucking congressional testimony, and that the executives at Lumen and the executives at AT&T and all these places, they don't want to go there. There is a potential liability. There is potential reputational damage. So for once, I'm sure the lawyers are being overactive, but they're not making up the liability concerns here, where in other cases they are. And that's why I also want to put the fail in the hands of the government, in that we failed to do any kind of liability protections for disclosures, and we have failed to define a lane to engage with companies under these situations, where you can say, look, this is so important, and it's just so landmark and important that here's your letter saying that you are not in trouble for getting hit by this thing. Now get in the fucking room and collaborate with everybody else.
Right. Costin, let's shift gears to your next story on the list. We want to give shout outs to all these folks that did all this amazing research this year. There was a long, long list, not only of things that we came up with, but folks who submitted to our Google Docs as well. A lot of shout outs for folks from Proofpoint, a lot of shout outs for folks from Lumen and some of their work around these Soho botnets and some of the things we had this at some of LabsCon. Well, but Costin actually went through and came up with some obscure things. Costin, give me the other one on your list.
What else is on my list? Novi Spy, we discussed it quite recently,
Last week,
so
yeah.
I don't want to get into details. If
But
you're
you
not,
like that story.
Yeah,
It's a
I'm
I
big
like
enough
surprised
that.
one,
that it's
right?
like it's so top for you. Why?
This
What?
celebrates Novi Spy thing, yeah.
It's not well. Like, let me clarify what I was looking for in these stories. I was essentially looking for new things that nobody has found before, right?
Ah,
With the potential to, let's say, change our understanding about how security is done. So, like, yeah, of course, people were thinking about physical attacks in the past, passing your device to officers during border control or during like all sorts of searches. But there weren't many documented cases when, like, through physical attacks, people got malware on their phones, and especially when those physical attacks include legitimate forensic tools like Celebrite in this case. So I thought that was quite an interesting story. People should keep that in mind. Like how to secure their phones. It's an addition to their threat model if it wasn't already. That was, in my opinion, Novice Spy. So again, you can listen to the previous episode when we talked about that. Goblin Rat was this story that was also on my list. A research from Solar RT about a passive backdoor, so the kind of a passive no-bus backdoor that runs on Linux systems that nobody else has found before. It's written, if I remember correctly, it was in Golang. One of the biggest frustrations for me this year was how to write Yara rules for Golang malware and Rust malware. I mean, yes, there's a lot of tools like Floss from Mandiant that help you extract the strings, but like, for instance, even Floss from Mandiant doesn't handle Linux ELF binaries. So it's just like a personal frustration with Golang in general, and probably it's not just me, but there's others out there who know how painful it is to reverse engineer Golang and Rust, hint hint. But Goblin Rat, it sounded like a cool story to me, which is why it made it to the list. There's a lot of
Why?
stories this year, but a lot of them. Again, shout
Who is
out
this guy? Wait,
to all
let's
the
stick on
cool
Goblin Rat.
researchers. Yeah,
Let's stick on Goblin Rat for a second. Who are these people? Who's behind this? And why do
we
they
don't know.
describe it as like the most mysterious and secretive Linux backdoor ever?
Well, we don't know who is behind Goblin Red, right? But if you're asking who is Solar RT, I think this is the Russia Telecom Solar team, which is some kind of research team they have in there.
The victim organization was in Russia?
I think it was Solar. I think it was RT itself, the victim organization. So we don't like see a lot of these things. Like the vast majority of research that comes out nowadays is mostly from Western companies. For them, it's like also easier to post and to publish. So you don't get to see too often the kind of research that comes from non-Western nations, especially at the time when the world is at war. This is a reality. The world is at war. If you're like, we've been bikering about democracy, and in fact, democracy is no longer democracy, but the reality is the world is at war, and cyber war is this dimension that you just simply can't ignore. It is any kind of bit of information that gives you an understanding of how China, Russia, Iran are doing research and going about these new threats they discover, to me is very, very fascinating. And it's interesting because in a lot of cases, people underestimate the capabilities of these nation states. Yeah, like their technology is ages behind. Their people are uneducated and they don't know English and so on and so on, right? But in reality, like sometimes these kind of top stories come and they just make you remember that there are top researchers in these countries, and these countries, they do have the capability to catch Western operations sometimes. So that's why, to me, this seemed like a kind of an interesting warning style story about the capabilities of both sides of the conflict.
I mean, speaking of top researchers in these countries not getting credit, right? Like that's where you get stories like the Chinese researchers getting pissed off at Dakota because we're somehow dismissing what they've contributed to the threat intelligence industry. I think it was a very self-defeating argument, considering that in that same paper they plagiarized my work and Silas's and didn't give us credit. But
But at the
to
same
that effect.
at the same time, last week you said it would be naive to suggest that they don't really know. And
Yeah,
Right. I think the subtle distinction we're making here is it would be naive to think that there isn't that talent in that country. It's straight up racist to just look at a country like China, which has that much technical capability, wherewithal, vulnerability researchers, reversers, like in droves, in sheer numbers, eclipsing the rest of the industry, just statistically. And to look at them and say, oh, you guys clearly don't know how to do this. What I think we're saying is that excellent stuff is not making it out to sea. It's not making it out to the public, but it
and that might be
clearly.
deliberate.
Oh, for sure. For sure it's deliberate, right? You have a different incentive structure, and it's being, part of the reason Costin and I said in the last episode, we said, oh, we know that stuff is there, is because you see its effects in other operations, right? If you repurpose something the NSA had in a subsequent attack, it means you caught it, you discovered it, you caught it, you analyzed it, you understood it, and you repurposed it. And you shut the fuck up about it and you reuse it. So clearly this is being utilized in like their intelligence services. And similarly, I think there have been a lot of discussions about this in Russia, where when it comes to the Russians, there was this always this nefarious idea around Kaspersky, because you would see great is finding great stuff and putting stuff out. So there is the capability adjacent to Russia, and that must be it. And they must be telling the government what's going on. And in some cases, there was collaboration. There were things that were said back and forth. But I think that also underestimates the amount of technical talent within Russia, within the intelligence services, that was turning stuff out over there, within other organizations like Positive Technologies and so on, that were providing information back and forth. Like, these ecosystems are a lot bigger. And I think what we need to understand is that publication is a marketing aberration that is somehow feeding our own broader understanding and hopefully an academic understanding of what's possible and what's happening. But it's not default, and it is like a shooting star to get something really cool that makes it out to a paper, that makes it out to somewhere that the rest of us can see. But most of this cool shit is being done quietly.
But you're doing a disservice to your companies, right? Like China covering up this stuff and not properly documenting does a disservice to their companies that are potential targets, right? I mean, this is why we're asking for proper documentation, so we can know and have some knowledge and know how to protect ourselves and do this. If they're not doing this, then Chinese companies are depending on output from the West.
I don't know how Chinese companies do their defense. I also think that the Chinese ecosystem for defense is very different in non-trivial ways that we need to take into account, right? Like, Costin, rightly so, has been kind of mocking the people that say, hey, don't tunnel your traffic through a VPN, because then we can't tell you that you're infected, which is a way of saying we're monitoring and we're going to let you know that you're fucked. But that also highlights the other potential defensive strategy that I think is much more prevalent in China, which is, well, we control the Great Firewall. Most of it is discussed for censorship, but we can also control how the internet routing and the command and control routing and the blocking and the resolutions of things are happening for the entire country. So to what extent do these companies, I'm not saying they don't need to defend themselves, but they clearly are not at it on their own. And they also have an authoritarian government that can kick the fucking door down and go, give me that server. And that's something we wish we could do, but obviously it would say very different things about us as a society.
Costin said,
I think, I was thinking that there's different agendas here and different reasons why people might want Chinese companies to publish more. Maybe some like from that point of view, it makes sense to publish more to understand like what kind of things are targeting them and how they can protect themselves. And of course, there's the other point of view that we want them to publish more to understand how advanced they are, what are their research capabilities, how good they are at reversing things, how good they are at catching unknown things and dealing with unknown concepts they haven't seen before. And what scares me, like, is that there is a huge discrepancy between what they're actually publishing and what they actually can do. And you see that discrepancy most of the times with these zero-day competitions, when you see like Chinese hackers are like number one in all the tops for reporting 0 days to Microsoft, for finding bugs in smart cars, and so on and so on. But on the other hand, when it comes, let's say, to mobile malware, they don't use zero-click chains with persistence, or at least we don't know. They don't use like sophisticated router implants. They rely on those kind of tools. And what I'm afraid here is that there's a huge gap in visibility, that they do use zero clicks with persistence. They do use way more sophisticated router malware than the one that we are finding nowadays. And this is what worries me. I would like to know more, and I like to have better visibility into the research that happens over there. So that's why I'm encouraging them to publish more.
Costin said the world is at war, and it's reflected here. I mean, it's reflected in the big stories, the things we discuss. It's all tied to this. And Juan, the other thing on your top 5 list here was the Iran drone program, something that's really fascinating and a really, really interesting component as drones become part of our psyche today. Yeah. Why did this one stand out to you?
Well, I wanted to shout out Adam Ronsley in particular, formerly Rolling Stone, who seems to have a passion for this, because once I went looking for his paper, I realized he'd written a blog post about Iran as a drone power back in 2014. So 10 fucking years ago. This guy's been really dedicated to this. But Adam did this research for, in all fairness, for LabsCon 2023, and it only got published in 2024 to go alongside the Treasury sanctions against these companies. And I don't know to what extent, Adam's research alone sort of motivated some of this stuff, but it's a fascinating discussion about how technology transfer works with places like Iran, how information gets stolen, what they copy from, how a German company makes drone engines and motorcycle engines. You get this motorcycle company that, or really this, what is it called? Mado company that is essentially cloning these engines that are used for drones in Iran. And then part of Adam's research that I thought was sort of fascinating is to see those same engines and same technology pop up in Russian drones that are appearing in Ukraine. But sort of the cyber angle of this is also that there was a bit of a hack and leak involved in how this information comes out. And Adam puts a ton of work into actually verifying the information passed in that hack and leak, so as not to just swallow it hook, line, and sinker, which goes into even having this brilliant guy, I want to say Nathan, I can't remember his last name, help make a 3D model of what the remaining engine parts looked like for these downed drones, so that they could confirm that it was the same model as the thing that they were seeing in the leaks from the Mado company. So fascinating work by Adam, and a ton of credit to him and Nathan and the folks that put this stuff out. And then to see that actually make it out to a proper Treasury sanctions package, and a much broader discussion of how this Iranian technology is sort of destabilizing other parts of the world.
Costin, how does a heavily sanctioned company like Iran, that's had every sanction thrown at them, become a drone powerhouse? Like, how do you get components? How do you, I mean, does this mean that sanctions are largely irrelevant?
That's a very tough philosophical question, and I mean, I don't think that anyone can answer that for sure. I mean, sanctions, they do put some pressure on countries, but I think what we are seeing at the same time from Russia and Iran is that they do find ways to bypass those sanctions. They use like all sorts of import companies in friendly countries. They get some of the components from China. Then they maybe get some of the components through Kazakhstan, through United Arab Emirates, through Saudi, through BRICS countries, and so on and so on. So in a way, I think that sanctions, they do have an impact, but not like on everything and not as let's say immediate and fast as you want, because some of these companies that produce drones, they may have huge stocks of components, and when let's say they run out of certain components, they just try to be creative and replace them with something else. So unfortunately, yeah, that's happening. And I think it was just the other day that there's this discussion about an airplane that has been shut down by the Russian
Azerbaijan,
military,
yeah.
correct? Because it was mistaken for an Ukrainian drone. And I was thinking, like, yeah, we are for sure in the age of drone wars, and pretty much everything nowadays that you see flying in the sky, there's a higher chance that it's a drone than it is
Right.
a plane. And this can lead to all sorts of very bad situations like we have seen in the past. But the common the common sense and the final conclusion is that we still don't know what's going on with the drones in New Jersey.
And even if we can make the argument that the sanctions don't really work because these guys are a drone powerhouse, like you quite rightly mentioned, you've added an imposed cost and created this big, massive supply chain that has to be part and parcel of it, and that's how you end up with exploding beepers, right? It does create a big, massive gap there. Juanito, close us out. What's your last big story?
My last big story is actually, once again, I'm kind of dipping back into the 2023 pool, but only because this gets properly published in 2024, which is Ruben Santamarta's story about what really happened in Chernobyl and the Chernobyl exclusion zone right immediately after the invasion of Ukraine. It's this fascinating bit of research on his part. And I think you'll see kind of a theme in the things that I like. It's like we had these bits of smoke and indications that something weird was happening, and then some brilliant researcher throws themselves at the problem and tries to, eliminate the possibilities and figure out what exactly happened. And in this case, I mean, Ruben was great, and he was kind enough to like shoot me an early version of this just so I could try to help out. But what he did, and all credit to him. He basically went through all the possible explanations of why these alarms were going off in the Chernobyl exclusion zone after the invasion, after the Russians had basically taken over this portion of land, and everybody was kind of freaked out about what that meant. And he starts eliminating, well, like, what if it was like trucks that were passing by kicking up dust, and they're like, well, yeah, that doesn't work that way. And what if it was issues with these sensors that they had placed around there? And it's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. And then so you start eliminating all these possibilities, and what it comes down to is, well, actually it looks like somebody was messing with the servers and the data on purpose. And there's this sort of mild statistical analysis of how these radiation spikes manifest, and it essentially corners us down to the most likely possibility being that the Ukrainians themselves did this in order to try to freak the Russians out in order to leave the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Fascinating research, amazing paper by Ruben Santamarta, and then Kim Setter had this great coverage of his talk, and between the two, you get a really concise, like, great picture of what happened there. So if I think a lot of folks missed it, especially during Black Hat when this got dropped, a lot of things drowned there. So it may not be purely 2024, but it is an amazing bit of research that I think deserves a lot more attention.
Awesome. I just wanted to go to the one on my list, which we just discussed ad nauseum, so we don't have to spend much time on it, is the Sophos story on the Pacific Rim report from Sophos with the timeline of using the implant and then modifying the implant and bringing implant into the conversation. So for me, this stood out because it gave us a lot to talk about. It gave us a lot to think about. It gave us a lot of nuance to what happens in incident response and forensics and how we go about, watching and using our business intelligence tools. I think that one stood out. And I want to give Sophos a shout out as well they take a lot of shit for the firewall stuff and for other stuff, but for the clear way they described this and documented it and basically said, listen, this is what we do. This is what everybody does. I thought stood out, and I think it's a net benefit to us as an industry to have this kind of documentation. Does anyone want to have some closing thoughts on that, or we've just boarded that topic by now?
I think we fucking just went at it already. Like enough.
Good. Costin, go with your last your next one.
Yeah, I think with the next one on my list, I'm probably a bit more biased because of my position and my country's location, and the fact that a bit ahead of us, the Moldovan elections took place. And Checkpoint published this amazing research. They called it Operation Middle Floor, in which they documented all the Russian interference attempts at the Moldovan elections, presidential elections, happening right ahead of Romania. So for me, it was in essence some kind of a warning. On one hand, things to watch for. And to be honest, I think it was not just this, but pretty much all the other publications this year for about Doppelganger. I think Harfang published on that. I think also Sequoia published on that, and the French government published as well. So there's a lot of publications. You have to put all of them, let's say, together. The fact that this election interference takes place in Europe at such a massive scale, and it has a visible and significant impact over the elections that we have seen in Romania recently, this is something you cannot ignore. This is why the Operation Middle Floor from Checkpoint is one of the top things on my list this year. What's that?
Reliable, because the ones out of Romania wasn't, including from your intelligence services, which basically completely...
I think people are unprepared. I think people are unprepared to deal with the complexity of these things. And a lot of research and a lot of, let's say, traditional intelligence work is totally unprepared to deal with the complexities of cyber. And thinking that you know your adversary and you know how they operate. We know how they work. This is how they worked in Ukraine, or this is how they work. You need to leave that behind and try to approach everything with an open mind. And realize that there are no rules in this game. It's kind of a new territory. It's old tricks and new tricks at the same time, with money laundering, with different interests, with local actors, with remote actors, with pretty much everything from cryptocurrencies, magic money, to advertising agencies abroad, local advertising agencies, useful idiots. Everything, let's say, that you read about
normal
in the books,
idiots,
everything that Pacepa wrote about in his books, with today's complexities, magic money, and the power of internet, TikTok.
All right, I want to go to my quick last one, and just some quick honorable mentions because we're starting to run out of time. One of the big ones that stood out for me this year was the CSRB investigation of Microsoft. I thought it was a landmark document that really shed some light in a place where we never really get to see. I thought it really was impactful in the way that it forced Microsoft to create this SFI thing. Whether it's real or not, at least we know there's a genuine... not genuine, at least we know there's a public commitment that we can hold them to. Can
you remind us, why was CSRB investigating Microsoft?
Well, Microsoft was completely compromised by both the Chinese and the Russians.
All right.
And this is why it was just a fascinating story all around. Juan mentioned APT29 in Microsoft and the fact that we only know about it because Microsoft, whatever they chose to share with us.
Yeah. But mind, like, the CSRB report was just about the exchange vulnerabilities.
Correct.
Right? Like, it's not even, like, we need 2 more CSRB reports on Microsoft just to try to cover all the things we've mentioned in this episode alone.
And I mentioned it and put it on this list because I believe this is the last CSRB report we'll ever see. I think that's
Wow.
going to be gotten rid of. I
That's
think
a prediction for next year.
I don't believe the CSRB survives next year, and I think
Somebody
this
set
is
a reminder to check next year at this time what happened to the CSRB and what happens to Mandiant inside of Google. You know, those are good reminders, I think, to go
fascinating. I
back
think
to.
it's going to be really fascinating to see how the SFI plays out as well, because one of the spin-off of this is that the government tried to force Microsoft to free up the logs, and then as we found out from ProPublica, that became a big giant book. A book that should be a book study in how to hoodwink and get your
Government.
vendor lock in there. So
I
that about closes the list for me. You got a
While
thought,
we're
Juan?
on that topic, I actually wanted to point to this book I just finished yesterday called The Tech Coup, How to Save Democracy from Silicon Valley, which is a very ambitious subtitle, but it's Mariaja Schaak's book. She was, I believe, a Dutch parliamentarian and then actually joined the Cyber Peace Institute for a bit. And I'm assuming her disgust with what she saw on the inside is part of what motivates this book because I was like, look, I read this book expecting to hate it. I assumed that it was going to be like shitty. And actually, it was surprisingly good about pointing to all of the attempts at regulatory capture, excess lobbying from companies like Microsoft and Google, and these sort of like phony attempts to supposedly improve security, like the SFI, but also Cyber Peace Institute, and like a bunch of the lobbying that's happening towards the EU as regulator. And she does a great job of just sort of showing how these things are not working, how nefarious and really insidious a lot of the lobbying actually becomes, how essentially the incentives are all misaligned for us to get the information that we've been talking about today and that you're talking about with the CSRB. And frankly, I'll say this: I didn't know to appreciate the CSRB while we had it because I just saw it as something that hopefully was on this linear track of growth where we say, the initial efforts not so good, but maybe they keep improving, maybe they're going to do more and more. And then you see the Microsoft one, you go, okay, great job, you guys had independence and you used it for something good that we all needed. Amazing. Now, what's next? And then the idea being that it's not there anymore and we're not going to get any more, makes me realize sort of the massive gap that it was filling, if very slowly, that I was hoping to see more of, right? Like we need 2 more CSRB reports on Microsoft alone. Where's the SolarWinds CSRB report? Where's the CSRB report on all the garbage appliances? Amongst so many other things that have sort of failed us categorically that we just don't have the incentive structure to be able to fix.
And I've been publicly critical of the membership of the CSRB. I think we could have done with better people than the same government people who are supposed to protect the thing. You put them to investigate the thing. I got a big problems with the membership of it. But shout out to the folks of the CSRB to actually document these things, leave some reports behind. The Lapsus the Lapsus investigation was pretty interesting. It also forced some changes at T-Mobile and some of the telcos around SIM swapping and protecting SIM swapping and so on. So there's been some incremental checkbox of wins coming out to the CSRB. It hasn't been perfect, obviously. And it's going to be a shame when it's all gone next year, like I'm predicting. Costin, close us out quickly.
The last entry on my list, you mean?
Dada.
Yeah. So I really love the episode when Stephen Adair joined us to talk about his talk at CyberWarCon. If people don't remember, it was about this APT28 nearest neighbor Wi-Fi attack. I love the story. Again, we discussed this before, the fact that maybe it's not like a super fresh and new, but it gets you thinking. Like, you deploy all sorts of defenses in your office, in your company, firewalls and everything, and you actually become a victim because a threat actor is just exploiting your neighbor who doesn't have the same kind of defenses and leveraging the Wi-Fi to get access to your network. So this kind of, again, story outlines the new mentality, the new kind of challenges that you have to deal with. And the way it was presented, I love the fact that they were doing a kind of detective hunting style. Like, we found it was this access point, and we found it was the neighbor. The neighbor was also owned by their neighbor, and then the other neighbor didn't want to share any more information. So it felt like one of these Alice in Wonderland stories with how deep the rabbit hole can go, which is why it made my top 5. Again, like the list of stories was pretty big. It was huge. I don't know if I have time to mention a few others that were like really interesting.
No, go ahead.
Go, man.
I love the Raspberry Robin our research update from several companies this year. Portal Combat by the French government. The Dutch, we need to mention the Dutch with their code
Always the
hanger
Dutch.
report. Comprehensive analysis of the iSoon leak. This almost made my list. The iSoon leak, I think it was one of the big stories of the year and almost made my top 5. Doppelganger because of the elections interference. Predator spyware from Recorded Future. Acid Pour from Sentinel-1. APT-44 graduating from Mandy and Google. Miter.
This guy reads a lot.
Miter
Yeah,
hack.
Mr. Show Off over here.
At least one of us fucking reads.
I read and I enjoy every single one of these stories. So kudos to all the researchers who put them together. Maybe we should actually publish this larger list for people to take a look during the holidays.
At least one of us has a Medium page, so maybe we'll find it there.
Apparently. My blog hasn't been updated in like 2 fucking years, so...
From my side, some honorable mentions. I wanted to give a shout out to Sung-Soo Park, our ex-colleague Sung-Soo, who is now at Zscaler, and an amazing work he did tracking North Korean activity, tracking hacks and heists against magic money, and more importantly, this fascinating paper he put out on... Pyongyang in your pay rise, these fake North Korean IT workers, and just exactly how they operate and what's the tool sets and so on. So fascinating work from Sung-Soo. Shout out to Sung-Soo and the guys at Lumen and Microsoft that gave us this last report much more recently on Turla and Turla hacking into this, the Pakistani APT and using that access to piggyback, and then Microsoft following up and saying, hey, listen, these secret Blizzard people had, they were using the tools and infrastructure of at least 6 other threat actors over 7 years, and that kind of spy versus spy and everyone living on these C2 boxes was fascinating research to me. Last thing I want to mention is my guys at Binarly, who's a friend of the podcast as well. I watched them do this PK fail research that they presented at LabsCon as well. I watched that sausage being cooked from beginning to end, and I think anyone doing research below the operating system and looking in the area of firmware land is significant for me. So I'll close it off there. Juanito, you got some last thoughts?
There's definitely some things that crossed my desk where I was fascinated but didn't necessarily have the time to look into them as deeply as I wanted to. One of them is this NSPX 30 research by Facundo Munoz over at ESET, who, by the way, is an amazing researcher, great guy. And I love these instances where we see what to me looked like Chinese threat actors focused on China. We obviously don't have much of an incentive to research these things in the Western side, but it means that we're missing a whole side of what Chinese TTPs actually look like, what they do when they think they're acting with impunity, and I think that's super cool. It also reminds me of something Kaspersky put out, I believe called Lu Yu or Lu Yang. It was this threat actor similarly doing some kind of man-in-the-middle type infections within China as well. Super fascinated by these things. I think it's great research that I'd love to spend more time on. Similarly, right, Lumen with Raptor Train, Michael Horka put some of the stuff out at LabsCon. Anything there that essentially relates to the other thing that got pushed out of my top 5, but that I really wanted to mention, being the IOC extinction blog post by Michael Rogge at Mandiant, which I think may be the one piece where we have seen more of a broad methodological overview and discussion of these orb networks, or these, non-attribution networks that are sort of the big thing of 2024 that everybody finally caught on to and we're finally discussing, and that has shown us just how little clothes the Emperor has, the Emperor being NSA. And then finally, I wanted to point to Arcane Door, amazing research by our friends over at Cisco Talos. I will put it out as, I'm fascinated at this Lua backdoor that pops off, but I will say that I'm putting it there with an asterisk next to it, which is I would love to see the backdoors themselves, right? Like we got a lot of information about the infrastructure, did not get the backdoors themselves, and this is something I'm fascinated by. Particularly as we continue to look for things like Plexing Eagle and other threat actors that have been living on appliances and telco stuff for 10 years, and we never get to see. But amazing research, really cool stuff, and I hope that this year I'll be able to do more, follow in Costin's footsteps and actually read other people's research with enough time to do some of the follow-up myself.
And we might be suffering from recency bias as well. We started this podcast, I believe, in June, July.
Correct.
So, so it's kind of like the themes from July to now. So that the folks who did research early into 2024 that we don't remember, we apologize. Your work is valuable. Please continue to document all the things you find, share all the things you can.
Well, while we're at it, if we miss something, clearly it's not top of mind, just post it in the fucking replies to the tweets, Blue Sky, everything for this podcast, and we're more than happily take a look at it.
Happy New Year, my friends. I wish you the best for the new year. Costin, I wish you democracy.
Thank you.
What's the latest over there? Are we going to close with some election thoughts?
Yeah, this was such from the point of view of elections, this was a crazy what is it, merry-go-round, one winner, another winner, one winner again, like elections interference, no elections interference. It's been absolutely kind of a madness. And if you ask me what I want is a bit of peace during the holidays. I understand that certainty is not possible, but a bit of peace would be nice, and a bit of fireworks. Like, fireworks are mostly legal in Romania, but my hairdresser is selling some amazing shit at the very, very good, reasonable prices that he buys off some Chinese guys at the Chinese fair. So I'm gonna post some photos, not of me doing these things, of course, but other people doing this kind of things.
Don't blow your hands off, man. Those are the money makers. You need to
or the eyes.
Juanito,
right. No beepers.
What's your resolution for 2025?
I think 2025 is an important year for me, I hope. To be honest, 2024 has been an extremely rough year on my end for a variety of reasons. Not one that leaves us in a bad place, thankfully. So
can we just mention how amazing Juanito looks? I mean, for the folks who've been watching these YouTube videos from the first one to now, he's been transformed physically, I think. I think it's fair to say, right, Costin?
Yeah, look at the new tattoos and the unbuttoned shirt,
unbuttoned shirts,
all
the
that
nipples
thing,
out, everything.
I appreciate. Well, look, man, this year, not to make this about me, because it's not particularly about me, but lots of changes at S1. We went from a time when Migo was no longer with us, who's been sort of like the spiritual leader of labs.
Well, Migo is still with us.
Well, he's still with us
right.
in flesh and blood, and God bless him. He's still an amazing friend.
Must have given people a heart attack.
No longer at S1, and just a lot of changes, which I can now say have been changes for the better. Right, we're hiring, we're bringing new folks on, we're expanding the threat intel remit. We have amazing leadership now with Steve Stone and Chris St. Myers sort of coming up to take up the torch. But that's one of these big changes along the way. Issues with friends with mental health issues, my own mental health journey, which you've all listened to far too much. moving to DC, changing all these, and starting this podcast, and starting to rejigger and reshuffle the projects that I'm involved in, and how I spend my time, precisely because, if I have a resolution for 2025, it's more research. I want to go back to publishing. I want to go back to the write-ups. I want to take up some of my passion projects, like reverse engineering with LLMs, and like figuring out all these new superpowers that we, what was it, what did they call Sam Altman, the twink overlord, have been gifting us?
Jesus.
Twink royalty. And I really would love for 2025 to be characterized by just getting to do cool hacker shit with my hacker friends.
It's a great way to close the episode. Thank you, gentlemen. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.